The Colts focused heavily on their secondary this offseason, adding a nice blend of talented youth and experienced veterans. And today we're going to tell you exactly why you should be excited for this new cast of characters. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Colts fans, thanks so much for tuning in and making us your number one listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Jake Arthur, joined as always by my partner, Zach Hicks. As you can see, the sun's out, so the guns are out.
It's actually really hot in my townhouse right now. We're trying to get some things fixed. But yes, we'll say, on YouTube, you guys are seeing it's purely for you guys. We're keeping Hag with his shirt down so I don't look bad.
Yeah, on audio you guys are missing out, but on YouTube you can see that Zach is he's showing the yokedness right now. Yes. Anyways, we're gonna speak today with former NFL defensive back and current DB trainer Jonathan Hagler about some of the major storylines surrounding this Colts defensive backfield. That includes rookie safety Nick Cross and the sticky contract situation with Kenny Moore II. Zach and I are also going to dive into new Colts cornerback Stephon Gilmore later. But without further ado, let's welcome in Jonathan Hagler here to the show. Many of you are probably already familiar with Jonathan, as he's done quite a bit of work with Zach in the past, where they kind of study and break down some defensive back film. Jonathan is currently a DB coach and owner of the NET Center. Thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Thanks for having me on, man. Starting to really love the Colts Nation. Last year I felt a part of the fam, all season. They showed a lot of love. So
there we go. Very good. So, of course, with Colts Nation, they're also very excited about their newest safety. The Colts used pick 96 in the third round on Maryland safety Nick Cross. They decided they couldn't live without him. His price was going to be a little too rich next year, so they traded up into the bottom of the third and got him. What do you think about him as a player? From what I hear, you've done quite a bit of research on him.
One thing that sticks out about Nick Cross is he's an elite athlete. You see it on film. I think if you put on the first, if you're a film guy, you put on the first play against West Virginia or second play against West Virginia, he shoots out of a cannon, lights a guy up, 15 yards away. And it's just impressive to cover that much ground. Now, I had no idea he was going to test the way he did. When he goes sub 4.35, when you jump 37, when you jump 130 inches on your broad. But I think he brings a ton of speed, a lot of athleticism, and a different type of physicality. When he comes downhill or when he goes in to make a tackle, it's not nice. He's coming with bad intentions. He's trying to take somebody out of a game, and that's some things that I really love about his game.
That'll endear himself to Colts fans pretty quick. Everyone wants to relate to Bob Sanders, so that'll
be good. Legend.
Yep. And when you look at his game, so many people coming out were like, oh, this is a free safety with that speed, that athleticism. Oh, this is a free safety. But what I've always said on this podcast and said on Twitter a lot is the Colts have always viewed him as a strong safety, and that's what he's going to be this year with the retirement of Khari Willis. He's going to step in and be a strong safety, maybe not the starter right away, but he's going to be that. How do you like his fit as a strong safety? And were you one of those guys who said, hey, this guy can play in the box. He can be kind of a box safety in like a cover 3 defense?
I believe so. I mean, when you look at some of his best plays, obviously he was asked to play deep a lot, and he made a lot of good plays. But some of his biggest mistakes came from playing deep.
Right.
He gets really nosy. He wants to be close to the line of scrimmage. If you watch him play, his eyes are in the backfield a lot. When tight ends or defenders or he gets beat on the double move, when they get by him, it's because he's peeking. Now, when you see him come into the box or when you see him fly into the box, he really excels. He matches up well with tight ends. He covers sideline and sideline very well. Like I said, he's a very fast athlete. I like his game in the box. And I think for a young safety, I think that's a natural transition for him that'd be very beneficial for his career instead of throwing him to the wolves. And, hey, some of those mistakes on Sundays, you start peeking a little too much and the Titans, they start, throwing 40-yard bombs on your head, or the Seahawks start hitting you with all those post routes again, the fans start to turn on you a bit. So I think that'll be really beneficial for his game, letting him be physical, letting him be fast, and just, do his thing in the box.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned some of those issues in his game a little bit. It seems like that's kind of a study thing and something that will come along with more experience. Right after the draft, we talked to some of the Colts scouts, and I think it was Mike DeRice, the Northeast scout, who was kind of oversaw Nick Cross. Mm-hmm. And even though Cross is kind of young, both in age and as a player at safety, DeRice was saying, I think he could surprise some people and be ready before a lot of people think, because whether it's a developmental thing or just, sit a year, a lot of people say he needed some time. What's your evaluation of that? Do you think he could be ready? And especially like Zach said, Khari Willis is retired, so he's probably going to be thrust into a bigger role than what was initially thought.
Oh yeah, I think in a perfect world, I think, you slowly integrate him into that defense and you increase his role, throughout the season. And then by year 2, he becomes kind of a guy for you. I think with his athleticism and his physicality, I think it'll transition nice to the NFL. So I don't think it's something that he's not capable of doing. When you have his size and his ability as an athlete, those guys tend to figure it out. Unless you just go out there and you're just awful, they tend to do okay. And that's kind of what I'm expecting from Nick Cross. I would have loved to see him, get a chance to slowly, come into the league. But sometimes, when those guys get thrown into the fire, you get to see how good they really are and how naturally they adjust. And that's something I'm excited to see from him. How does he adjust to being thrown to the fire a little bit? Because I think he can make an impact. He brings a lot of positive skill sets to the team.
Yeah, and that's something that Jake and I have talked about a couple of times, where these safeties come in with the Colts, like Khari Willis in 2019 was a 4th-round pick. He came in, he took that job by week 3. Julian Blackmon, the next year, he came in and took a starting job by, I would say, like week 5 or 6. Like once he came back, it was his job basically from that injury. So we do think Nick Cross is going to be that guy this year. But talking kind of long term, when you look at a guy like Nick Cross, I know the Colts internally are hoping, and maybe optimistically hoping, that he can be like a Jamal Adams in this type of defense. This is that cover 3, that Gus Bradley type defense where you want that do-it-all box safety who's just going to light up dudes on every single play. I'm not saying, compare him to Jamal Adams here, Hag, but like, do you think long-term that, Nick Cross, if he starts figuring it out around being a box safety, he could be maybe like a Pro Bowler, an all-pro type guy?
Those things are always super hard to project, but he checks the boxes when it comes to, is it possible? Some guys just, some guys are going to be rotational players. Some guys are going to be roster guys. But like I said earlier, he's an elite athlete and he's a very good football player. He comes from a football area in the Matha high school. Like they know football, you know what I mean? So I think he has the type of ability to make that type of impact down the road, and the defense does him a ton of favors. He doesn't have to be exposed. Like you can roll him down to the box. You can, like I said, really bring out his best traits. And, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, they've done a hell of a job drafting the last couple of years. I mean, they, some of the guys they picked up, I mean, when you look at Leonard and some of those other guys, they're studs. And I think having Gilmore and Kenny Moore, I think those guys will only help him out because they're veteran players. They'll be able to teach him. And, I think he's in a perfect situation to flourish. I mean, when you look at the big picture.
Yep. And I got one more question before we jump to the next thing, Jake. I know this is off script a little bit. I go off script, okay? I'm a renegade here.
Like I don't know that.
Right. One more question, Hag, is, you do your work with Stellar. Stellar is a sports group that Hag kind of scouts players and watches players. When did Nick Cross kind of come on your radar as someone watching college players?
About mid-season. You start talking to different people. And then, you have grades. He's a young guy, right? He's 20. Yeah. He still, has he turned 21 yet?
I think
he may have just turned 21. Like very, very young player. So like when you talk to scouts and things like that, they finally make their way to those underclassmen, those young guys. About mid-season, I was a Maryland fan. Not a Maryland fan. I watched Maryland due to Talia, right? Talia transferred to Thompson High School in Alabama a couple years ago, and they lit it up. So I've always tried to keep him. He went to Alabama. Alabama born and raised, so I like to keep up with the guys once they leave. And then I start looking at the prospects on their team. You start looking at the Raheem Jarrett. You start looking at who else do they have, and it's like, oh, the safety. I was like, ding, 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 ding. I was like, okay, let me watch him. And then when you get your hands on that, like I said, that West Virginia game really stood out to me. I was like, I like this kid. I like him a lot. And, I know during the draft cycle, we had people, hey, check out Nick Cross, check out Nick Cross, check out Nick Cross. I'm like, okay, I'll get to this guy, fully. Let me fully look into his film. I was like, he's got something, he's got something there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. So obviously there's reason to be optimistic about Nick Cross and his long-term projections with the Colts, potentially even short-term. But before we move on and talk about his new teammate Kenny Moore and that contract situation there, let's talk about these Built Bars, Zach. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar. But guess what? Your friends at Built have given Coconut Brownie Chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right, the Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy, marshmallow-covered, and 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness, guys. But stop drooling and listen. They're good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, but all delicious. Coconut Brownie Chunk Puffs are only here for a limited time. So go to Built.com now to make sure you don't miss out. They're going fast because they taste amazing.
All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. Delicious coconut, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Get to Built.com to order your box of Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Puffs right now. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo LOCKED15. We could not have Hag on this show without talking Kenny Moore. I had Hag last year on the Horseshoe Huddle YouTube channel, and we broke down defensive back play every single week. It was something that we just did every week until I think the last couple of weeks when I had COVID, and it was just a complete mess. But one of the constant themes of that show was how great Kenny Moore is. Kenny Moore was a star. Even in the weeks where it looked like he struggled, we were like, look, he's a risk taker, and there are times he's going to get beat. But at the end of the day, Kenny Moore is such a great impact on your defense. So, Hag, before we get into this whole contract dispute, and I wouldn't even call it a dispute because it's not like he's going to not play this year. But when we get into the talk about his contract, what are your overall thoughts on Kenny Moore, and why is he so great for this Colts team?
Kenny's he's a glue guy. When you look at the success of the Colts defense, like even when, like we said, the team may have not been doing well, he flashes. His energy, his leadership, and his ability just to make plays is, you have to take care of guys like that, because once they're gone, you tend to regret it. And because they're very hard to replace. It's super hard to find a guy that's that natural. And with his playmaking ability in the slot. And, guys like Kenny Moore, man, I love watching them play just because they have an ability to get their hands on footballs, to disrupt defenses. And I know he's 5'9", 190 pounds, but I don't know how many slot defenders set edges the way he does. I know the Titans hate him. The Titans hate him. Derrick Henry does not like him on his kneecaps, but that's what he brings to your team. He brings energy. He's definitely he's a glue guy for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so of course, during the 2019 offseason, Moore signed a $36 million deal. And, at the time, that was the highest paid contract for a slot defender. And it was a highly celebrated deal. A lot of people, especially around the league, knew that Kenny didn't quite have the national fanfare yet, but the contract was indicative of how the Colts and really people around the league felt about him. So at the time, very, very rich deal, but now he's the 27th highest paid corner overall. And that's based on his $8.3 million per season average. He's only going to make 6.75 this year and then 8.2 the year after. We're starting to see these elite corners get around 20 million a year. So it's pretty understandable to see why Kenny feels underpaid or would like a reworked contract at this point. What, is he underpaid? Like what range of pay should he be in about now, considering what we're seeing guys get paid now?
Well, I think, when you are that important and when you are as good as he is, I mean, he's coming off a year where he had the best year of his career, extremely productive. When you're that good and you play that many snaps, you should be paid like an elite corner. Now, because he played primarily in the slot, I won't say pay him like the Jalen Ramseys, like the Denzel Wards, but he needs to be up in that upper group because he's extremely valuable for the Colts. Like, I know last year when we were talking about when we were doing all those DB segments, when there was zero ball production or zero plays being made, it was Kenny. So, like I said, you can't let those guys walk. You have to make those guys happy because they tend to just make up for the lack of, whether it be last year, there's a couple safeties that played that weren't making things happen, right? Well, Kenny in the slot makes that safety better because now you have to throw at those guys, right? I think he definitely should be in that top 13 to 14 category, and whatever that is, I would say give it to him because I think he deserves it, and I think his play says it too.
Yeah, and there's so many reports coming out that he might hold out and stuff like that, but that's really just not a thing anymore. Players can't really hold out because of all the fines that come in. And I understand the Colts' point of view on this too, because extending a player when they have 2 years left on their deal is a tough precedent to set. So I get where the standoff is, and I get that Kenny Moore is showing his displeasure. But as someone like yourself who deals with a lot of players, you talk to a lot of players. You obviously were trying to make the jump into the NFL back in the day and stuff like that. We're seeing NFL players kind of have this feel of more empowerment lately. Yeah. It's not the NBA where guys can just pick and choose where they want to go when it comes to free agency and still get max deals. But it is definitely getting to the level where it's like these guys know their worth and they're going to voice their displeasure. Again, as someone who talks with a lot of players, who deals with agent side as well, what are your kind of thoughts on this whole era of football that we're seeing, where I know a lot of fans are kind of against it, seeing players kind of advocate for their own worth out there?
Oh yeah, well, I think the players are more educated, for one. They're aware of how much money is going into the NFL. They're aware of how much these TV deals are worth. They're not dumb. They're not that dumb anymore. There's a couple that are clues, but they have an idea of what's coming in. You know what I mean? And they know that they can. Teams can shovel out a little bit more, especially when you're in a position of where I'm playing well, like I'm playing good football. Take care of me. Yeah, I signed an extension. I was a undrafted guy coming out of Valdosta State. Yeah, give me that 6, and at the time it was high, but the market's changed, and when the market's changed, yeah, we do need to sit down a little bit more. Now, am I gonna say, hey, try to break the bank and pay me whatever it is? Like, I don't care about the team or the cap space, but take care of your guys. Take care of your guys that have played well for you, that are leaders for you. Like I said, that are glue guys for you. I'm definitely going to side more towards the players, but I also know it is a business and it has to make sense for the team.
Yep. And I think the Colts, I again, cutting Jake off because this is me just going renegade here. But I think the Colts are just a great example of the last couple of years, though, of a team that does pay their players. We've seen Braden Smith, we've seen Darius Leonard. We've seen DeForest Buckner right when they traded for him, they gave him that big contract. They are like a team that will pay their guys. So when it comes to Colts fans being so worried about this situation, I do think ultimately they're going to end up paying Kenny. I just don't think it's going to be right now. And I think Kenny kind of understands that. I think it's fine. But, Jake, you were jumping in there before I cut you off, though. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, and that's pretty much exactly what I was going to get at is you probably won't be able to find someone who's going to talk as high about Kenny Moore as Chris Ballard will, for example. Like you mentioned glue guys, Hag, like he knows that's a glue guy and they will take care of those guys. That's why I can't see this becoming a big issue, because even if nothing new happens with the contract status, I can't imagine that Ballard or anyone from the Colts front office hasn't been in contact with Kenny and given some sort of assurance, be like, look, I know the market's changed, this and that. Your contract doesn't look as good as it once did, but we want you here. Like, there has to have been some sort of assurances made. Like, that's just how the Colts operate. They want to take care of those guys. But Hag, another thing I was going to say, Zach and I have heard this a lot, unfortunately. One argument, and it even comes from fans sometimes, is the peculiar timing of this request, I guess, from Kenny, given that the last time we saw the Colts and him even, things weren't going well. Like the last couple weeks of the season didn't go well. How can you squash the argument of, well, if you want this new deal, don't have a terrible last 2 games of the season or whatever. Like, to me, it wipes out the last 4 years of what he did.
Yeah.
Like, people are just discounting that. What's the biggest argument you can make to squash that whole thing?
I mean, if you're judging players off of 2 games, then it's not what have you done for me. Like when you play upwards to 16 to 18 games now, and if you make it to the playoffs even more, what are we talking about? Less than 8%, 8-9% of the games that you play. Like it's not. That's not fair. That's kind of ignorant, to say just because you don't finish the season great. It's a long season. The quarterbacks, if I went in there and I talked about how Drew Brees threw 4 interceptions one game, is he an awful quarterback? Right. Do you not take care of Mahomes? Do you not take care of these two? What about Peyton Manning? They all had bad games. They've had series of bad games. But Kenny Moore has an incredible body of work. He was one of the most productive players in the NFL last year at the defensive back position. And he, at the end of the day, he's a stud. So if that's your argument, then that just shows a lack of appreciation for talent, because nobody's perfect. It's hard to play. It's hard to play in the slot. It's harder to play in the slot than it is on the outside. He's literally playing one of the hardest positions in football, and he's thriving.
Yep.
He's thriving as a guy that was undrafted, as a guy who's undersized, and he makes some crazy plays. All right. So I think, for those fans that are on Kenny Moore, show some appreciation, because there's a lot of teams that wish they had one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, the one thing I want to throw at that is, like you said, I know it's a what have you done for me lately, but only cherry picking those last 2 games is a what have you done for me lately is kind of what that argument is. Like, because again, he's coming off his best year where he made his first Pro Bowl as a slot corner. Like, you know how hard it is to make it when your position isn't even acknowledged by the Pro Bowl? like come on.
Chris Harris is like the last guy that people really had to take note of. And even that was a few years ago. So like,
right.
I feel like Kenny Moore is really the first guy since Chris Harris to make people pay attention to that position.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Like he's like, when we talk about standards, like right now he's the standard of slot play in the NFL.
Yeah. Now, Hag, we did not script this segment. That's why we're running a little late. So we do kind of have to let you go here. But man, I appreciate you jumping on. You know that I was fighting with Jake for like weeks to get you on, and just it would have been the first show I would have had you on if it were up to me. So
there was no fight. There was no fighting necessary. He's being dramatic.
Oh, good, man. Thank y'all for having me, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Absolutely. Everybody, thanks again so much to Jonathan for his time, and be sure to follow him on Twitter at John Hagler CR. That's at JONHAGLERCR. All right, so that was really good stuff with Hag there. Next, we're going to talk about yet another new addition to the Colts secondary. That is Stephon Gilmore. One of the flashiest signings the Colts seem to have made in a while outside of the quarterback position. That's a former NFL Defensive Player of the Year, former All-Pro, I think 5-time Pro Bowler. They kind of replaced Xavier Rhodes with Stephon Gilmore, so that's kind of the role he's overtaking. So that's a pretty nice upgrade if you look at it that way, Zach. What did you think overall about this move? What are you kind of looking forward to this year?
I mean, if you're someone like me who my intro kind of into the NFL and kind of into stuff like this was studying defensive backs, studying corners, studying safeties and stuff like that. I mean, Stephon Gilmore was the teach tape. I mean, that was the guy. Back when I started this thing, it was him. And then obviously Jalen Ramsey came in, and Darrelle Revis was kind of my high school years and stuff like that. But Stephon Gilmore was like the peak of cornerback play. I mean, he was Gilly Lock for a reason. And what I noticed when I was watching his film last year and then 2 years ago as well is maybe he's not as good as Defensive Player of the Year Stephon Gilmore, but the drop-off really isn't there. Like, he is still matching up with – against the Falcons last year, he followed Kyle Pitts for most of that game when he was with Carolina. And I think he had a pick in that game. He had 2 pass breakups. Kyle Pitts, he might have still had some production, but I know from every target that I saw with Gilmore on him, Kyle Pitts did not have many receptions. And then you go to other games. I mean, he was following number 1 targets on a Panthers defense that has some good corners, and that was when he came back halfway through the year after getting traded to a new team, a new scheme, and he came out and he played really well. So watching his film from last year, watching his film from 2 years ago, I still think he's Stephon Gilmore, and I think in a normal free agent period, Like this year, we saw outside the Jaguars, we saw a lot of contracts being a lot lower than what they typically are. I think in a normal free agent period, he's getting up to 15, 16, 17, maybe 18 million a year over 2 years. So the Colts were super lucky to get him at what they did. And like you said, if you're replacing Xavier Rhodes, or even, in my opinion, you're replacing Rock Ya-Sin, what he was doing on the outside with Gilmore. Like if Gilmore can replace what Rock was doing in terms of like receptions allowed and completion percentage, but just add a couple interceptions in there, I mean, that's a huge win for this defense. So I think Gilmore is going to be a great fit. I think he fits this cover 3 and single high type defense really well. And he's going to just thrive in the man match concepts that are going to be thrown out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he fits this defense very well, especially if there's going to be more man coverage involved and single high safety with a little less help. That his presence is really good for that. And some of the skeptics, I guess, see him in getting traded, and then he's with Carolina. He's banged up quite a bit over the last year and a half, and just like you said, there was a drop off, but it wasn't significant. If I'm going to go ahead and compare this to the Xavier Rhodes situation again, just because Xavier Rhodes had plenty of detractors before the Colts signed him 2 years ago. Like people thought he might have been done. He had a lot of injury issues too. This isn't even as sketchy of a situation as that. Like this is just really a small hiccup in what has still remained a very high level career. Like he's just been banged up a bit. And even with Carolina, he didn't look half bad. No. He was still, if you're going off PFF grades, he had a 77.1, which, that was a top 5 season of his career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't hate the Rhodes comparison you made there, but like you said, I think Rhodes, for instance, was coming in here where his last season with Minnesota, he was maybe like a cornerback 2, like a low end corner 2. Like he had a bad year because of injuries. Injuries were one part of it, but he did not look like Xavier Rhodes of the past. Stephon Gilmore went from the number one, like indisputable number 1 corner in all of football, like easy defensive player of the year, to maybe like a fringe top 10 guy. Still like a high-end cornerback 1.
Exactly.
Is what he was last year. So like it's kind of like what you said with Xavier Rhodes, where there were some detractors, but I think at the end of the day, almost anybody who kind of watched any bit of stuff on Gilmore's film last year could say like, hey, he still has it. Like again, it's not what he was, but he's still really, really good. And I think it's kind of a thing that nobody's really talking about, but like sometimes we just got to look ourselves in the mirror and be like, holy crap, we have Stephon Gilmore with the Colts.
Right. I think it's just overshadowed from a busy offseason of pretty big moves, but they for real have a potentially elite corner.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's so underrated about this is, Julian Blackmon is going to step in here as the free safety in a different scheme than what he's played in the NFL, a little similar to what he was doing at Utah, but for the most part, it's a different scheme. He's going to be doing a lot of single high type stuff. You know how much easier your life is as a single high safety when one side you really don't have to worry about as much. When you can just focus your eyes on half read stuff, half field reads and such, and kind of focus towards, Isaiah Rodgers' side, or helping Kenny in the slot, or helping the linebackers over the top, because you have Stephon Gilmore on the other side. Your life is made so much easier as a free safety. So I think Gilmore not only helps this defense overall, but it helps Julian Blackmon, especially going to a new scheme and coming back from a big injury.
It also helps having the front 7 that the Colts have. Yeah. That'll help Gilmore. You have Buckner and Ngakoue and what we assume will be an even better Kwity Paye up front. You have Darius Leonard doing Darius Leonard things. You have Kenny in the slot. Like the guys he has around him it'll be similar to when he was absolutely balling out with the Patriots, the level of competition playing around him. So that'll be a huge boost for him as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to be a really, really good year for Gilmore and just the Colts defense in general, as long as they adjust to this new scheme really well. That's my big caveat right now, is just like this defense. I want to see how they look in this new scheme. But outside of that, that's really my biggest concern. Like I feel really good about a lot of other areas.
Yeah. Well, guys, Merry Christmas to Zach. We gave him another DB episode. So I hope he's happy now.
We didn't talk about Curtis Brooks or Isaiah Rodgers, though, or Kylan Granson. So, I mean,
now we have.
Now we have.
Yeah. Now we have. Can't wait to see Curtis Brooks lining up at deep safety, man. That's going to be nice.
He can play some corner, right? We need a 5th corner.
Exactly. Well, guys, we will be back with you tomorrow. Zach and I are going to continue to prepare for the start of Colts training camp. Players report next Tuesday. First practice will be Wednesday. So there's still plenty of us to break down before then.
Yep, and guys, make sure you go on social media. Follow us on Twitter at Zach Hicks2, at Jake Arthur NFL, at Locked On Colts for our accounts page, and also at the Horseshoe Huddle page. I think we have 2 for Horseshoe Huddle there on Twitter, so definitely check them out. I think it's Fan Nation Horseshoe Huddle is what we have out there, or Horseshoe Huddle FN, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's Colts on FN, and then there's Colt Maven. So there's
Perfect.
2. You don't have to follow both. They both produce the same content, but Colts on FN is probably the one we would distribute the most.
Yes. And then also here on YouTube, I know you guys have been watching. Like Jake said, you get to see my bare arms, I guess, and stuff like that on YouTube. So that's, I guess that's a perk, or it's a downside if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. I think we're about to hit 400 subscribers here on YouTube.
We're getting close.
I mean, you guys are getting us to 1,000 before we have anything real to talk about. Like, we have Hag coming on just spewing knowledge, so we don't have to talk about as much. So we appreciate all that. And also on Facebook, guys, we are starting to get some things going on Facebook. We have a lot of places for you guys to follow the page, and we appreciate all the follows that you guys have already given us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again so much for making us your number 1 listen of the day. Now make your second listen of the day Locked On NFL Pod. No, got to start that whole thing again.
Y'all good.
That was so fucking clunky. And thanks again for Jonathan Hagler for joining us. And thanks to you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen of the day the Locked On NFL Podcast. That's our national NFL experts and insiders keeping fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. And guys, it's almost not the offseason anymore, so that's pretty dope in itself. And with that, we'll see you tomorrow.